I have kind of a weird, complicated relationship with Disney's, Sony's, Insomniac's Marvel Spider-Man. PS4. Remastered. I'm a big Spidey fan, so obviously, at least to a certain extent, I'm gonna enjoy a big budget AAA game about the wall crawler. But I'm also an insufferable man-child, so I want media about my favorite thing for babies to be perfect and appeal specifically to me. Jokes aside though, I've always had high hopes for Spider-Man games. Of course the perfect game for me is never gonna exist. My tastes are way too niche. But that's not gonna stop me from hoping the best with these games, and it's certainly not gonna stop me from criticizing them. So let's do that. I've beaten the game countless times by now. I genuinely don't remember how many, but I never replayed it because I enjoyed the game as a whole. I went back to it because it's the best, most accessible Spider-Man game. But that's not exactly a high bar. And it wasn't the combat, story, characters, world, definitely not the atmosphere, and it wasn't even the swinging that got me to replay this title over and over again. No, I replayed Spider-Man PS4 because I really enjoyed looking at Spider-Man. Peter looks very cool in this game, with his mask on anyway. I hate his stupid new face. And I like changing his little outfits. I like this game on the level of playing around with my favorite action figure. I just like looking at the immaculately rendered Spider-Man models, and I find that to be kind of a problem when that's the most enjoyable part of a game for me. So let me ramble for a little while about why the rest of the game doesn't really do it for me. Now don't get the wrong idea, I don't think the game's bad per se, but it does have several issues that drag it dangerously close to that. But like I said, I've beaten the game more times than I can count, so it's gotta have something else going on for it than just being a Spider-Man game. Sure, that something is tantamount to some mindless fun pushing buttons while you listen to a podcast or something, but that's still valid, and I've had a whole lot of fun with exactly that. Anyway, Spider-Man PS4 is an open world game, so how's that aspect of it? It's okay, I guess. The open world is a technological marvel, it's incredibly impressive. The detail, the scope, the sheer size, and the fact that it's running at 120 frames on the PS5, it's crazy. Unfortunately, there's not really any reason to explore. Yeah, there's the collectibles, backpacks, and pictures to take of landmarks and such, but nothing that would make you stop in your tracks to really take in and inspect something. It's a bit trite to bring it up, but I feel like the one thing they should have taken from the Arkham games is the points of interests around the map that were there just to be cool, interesting, mysterious places to explore. Obviously they'd need to be scaled down in Spider-Man, because the map here is so big. I imagine making more detailed nooks and crannies and hidey holes would have been way harder. This title does have those to a certain extent, to be fair. They're mostly relegated to the picture-taking collectibles though, so they're not really anything that would stop you from web-slinging and actually investigate something. The closest to what I'm talking about here in Spider-Man is Uncle Ben's grave, but again that only amounts to one little gravestone in the cemetery with a button prompt on it. The combat's actually kinda okay. I like to pretend to be this big action game enjoyer who's all pompous about combat mechanics, so when I first played the game I was pretty sour on it. But after the countless playthroughs I've done by now, it's fun enough. Do I wish there was more variety to combat? Absolutely. Should there be more responsiveness and impact to the feel of it? Definitely. Is it really weird and baffling that you can only hit one guy at a time with your non-web-based attacks? Yup. But even after those countless playthroughs, I haven't fully gotten over punching guys, webbing them up, and sticking them to walls. The takedown and heal being tied to the same meter is kinda interesting, I guess, but the takedown being an insta-kill is a bit uninspired, especially because the game's weirdly obsessed with having most combat options be enemy deleters. In addition to the takedowns, there's the stick-click supers, of which I only ever used the Web Blossom, because it was the fastest to delete the most amount of enemies, while being the most Spider-Man-y. Speaking of doing things based on how Spider-Man-y they are, eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed a distinct lack of gadget use in my footage here. That's because I hate them. They don't fit here. They shouldn't be in the game. They're not Spider-Man. Peter might use the occasional gadget or gizmo, but not these kinds of things, not in this kind of way. I'm convinced these were implemented because, well, the Arkham games had gadgets and we're doing the Arkham of Spider-Man, as well as the MCU movies had Peter tied strongly to Iron Man to the point of kind of aping his shtick. But this isn't Batman, and it's not the MCU Spider-Man either, so I refuse to use them, which thankfully the game mostly allows. Like, if you're gonna add something so out of place to a game like this, you better make it good, and they didn't. The gadgets are just enemy deleters. If this game cared about providing any kind of competent design, there could have been, I don't know, different types of enemies who'd react differently to different gadgets. You could have robots that maybe malfunction and turn on the other enemies by the electric webbing. Some kind of beasts or monsters that get distracted by the little drones. But I guess that would be too fantastical for a Spider-Man game. There were several opportunities here for interesting, fun game design, but instead we just have Peter and his many little toys that let you engage with the game less. Oh, and on the topic of enemy variety, it's dreadful. Nothing but guys and dudes. The most interesting enemy in the game is a jetpack guy, and they're annoying as fuck. At least they exhibit some sense of having been designed by someone with ideas. Conceptually, the area denying with the red stuff they lay on the ground is neat, but it's not enough. I already know that I should be in the air. It does more damage, you're harder to hit, and the enemies keep telling you how helpless they are when you're up there. And don't get me started on the bosses. I will, but don't. They're awful. They're so bad. Wait for them to do their thing, maybe whip them up, then press triangle and do some damage. The Rhino-Scorpion fight is the most interesting of the bunch, cause you need to dodge poison blasts while trying to hit Rhino with crates and other environmental stuff. The final boss may be a spectacle, but that's all it is. You know what? The bosses are such gruel, I'm just not gonna talk about them any more than that. Fuck them. Swinging is obviously the most important thing a game about the wall crawler has to get right. That's his thing. He shoot at a web and go whoosh. That's Spider-Man. Now I'm not gonna do what everyone else does and rattle on about Spider-Man 2. No, not that one. Not that one either. Man, this is kind of a problem. Anyway, instead of comparing this game's take on web slinging to all the ones that came before it, I'll just look at it in the context of this game. And at first glance, it looks great. The animations are smooth, detailed, and varied. The quality is clear and palpable. This is definitely AAA Spider-Manning. It even feels great for the most part. There's a tactile flow to the whole thing. It's satisfying to move around this impressive as all hell rendition of Manhattan by swinging and jumping off different points of the arc, then surging forward with web sips. It's fun, but you do it for hours. It's the thing you do the most in this game. It's kinda the thing you come for to this game. So I can't help but get bored with it and ultimately frustrated by it. A lot of people like to bring up physics with swinging in Spider-Man games. Obviously, physics are very important for a thing like this, but I don't really care about the minute details like some seem to. I'm the last person to demand realism from video games. Sure, some physics-based things would probably improve the swinging a lot. Like, it would be real nice if you could actually feel the distance after a long fall before coming to a swing, instead of it having the same momentum as any other swing from a fall of any height. But ultimately, I care about fun and interesting experiences. Spider-Man PS4 swinging is fun up to a point, and not very interesting at any. Pressing R2 and X over and over again gets real tedious real fast. And it's incredibly yawn-inducing that the way to move as fast as possible in this is to press R2 and L2 simultaneously, then time and X press. Sure, there are different moves you can do while swinging, but they're not there to flesh it out, but for utility, for specific niches. You do a zip to go forward while maintaining height, you dodge to dodge attacks, ground stomp to attack enemies and maybe to land a little bit more precisely, and that's kinda it. There's the tricks, and they're a wonderful addition, don't get me wrong, but implemented in quite an unimaginative way. They definitely improved this aspect in Miles' game, but it's kinda crazy how dull the execution of this idea is here. I mean, they could have done so much more with the swinging. Well, maybe not. Maybe just getting the game to work at all took most of the development time and focus. But I'm here to muse about my design tastes and sensibilities and complain that I'm not getting what I want out of games, not to realistically speculate about the intricacies and hardships of AAA game development. I'm a little baby who wants a street that doesn't exist. Wah. But it does suck that this game doesn't really care to provide that in-depth, hardcore web-slinging experience that a lot of fans seem to want out of a Spider-Man game. Or any of these games really, considering 2's idea of expanding on the swinging looks to have less of it by adding a gliding mechanic. I mean, maybe I'm alone in this, but I want more stuff to do while swinging. More moves, more tricks. I want Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but Spider-Man. I'm fine with traversal being simple and easy, and I'm not one of these people who think just doing a swing to get from point A to B should be challenging because of some intricate, realistic physics system, but I do want at least reaching top speed to be something that requires a modicum of skill, and preferably more buttons to be pressed than 3. Honestly, I just want to press more buttons. Alternate between different moves to work towards speed. I want Spider-Man swinging Devil May Cry. One of my big takes on game design is that almost any game would benefit from a style meter. A gauge that tells you how well you're doing and encourages you to do better. So many games would be more interesting with a system like that implemented properly. I do understand that many people who play games that do have style meters or result screens like DMC or Bayonetta don't like them because they feel like they're being judged. I get it, and I get not wanting a game like Spider-Man that's trying to cast as wide a net as possible to feel like it's expecting a bunch of skill-intensive execution from you when you just want to look at Spidey swing around buildings. But that's why these kinds of systems could just be optional, whether it's just something you can simply not engage with or needing to opt into with a specific higher difficulty mode. This is kind of beside the point, but bear with me for a sec. The discourse around game difficulty always revolves around easy modes and accommodating experiences for people who don't wish to be challenged all that much for all sorts of reasons. And that's absolutely, completely valid. But surely we can also be accommodating to the other direction, especially in the AAA space. Not that I want every game to just be harder, and that's not what I'm trying to get at here, because I don't care to have a Spider-Man game be super difficult and challenging. It's intrinsically a power fantasy. I just want it to be more mechanically interesting. And I feel like whenever you ask that of games, the conversation gets steered toward difficulty and accessibility, and that's a different topic altogether. But like, this game already lets you get through the game without much effort. You can get around fine by just holding R2 in the direction you want to go towards. You can basically delete enemies with the gadgets and the stick click supers. So if the player can already basically ignore the main facets of the gameplay, or more generously engage with them in a much more simplified way, even on the hardest difficulty setting, why not implement more complex mechanics and systems? If a AAA game's job is to be appealing to as wide an audience as possible, wouldn't more, for the lack of a better term, hardcore gamers also be included in that? I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating for just more difficulty. I simply want more creative design from the AAA space. They have the resources. I don't think it's too much to ask for Insomniac to get a little experimental, a little out there. Like, why not add more moves and something like a style meter? Insomniac already did one in Sunset Overdrive. Maybe the design staff didn't really overlap with these games, but kinda seems like a no-brainer to me to check for some inspiration from previous games from your company. Sure, that game wasn't the best, but that doesn't mean every single idea there was bad and unimplementable for future projects. This title's attempts at gameplay variety outside of combat and swinging ranges from dull to outright offensive. Stealth is fine, I guess. It definitely feels like an unfortunate 7th gen design stain that got stuck. Like, I can't help but be a little bit harsh about it, cause sure, Spider-Man does stealth sometimes, but it really isn't as big of a thing to the character as it is to Batman. So yeah, I'm thinking the stealth here is kinda undercooked, and it's like that because of the Arkham games? Though I can't be too mad about it, because at least you can ignore it for the most part, and most of it can be done quite quickly. There's also the little science puzzles. They're gross, they're disgusting, ew, get them out of here. Seriously though, why are they in the game? They're awful, they waste your time, and the devs know it, considering you could turn on a setting that lets you skip them. It is funny that they tried to hide the acknowledgement by putting the setting into accessibility. But the absolute worst part of Marvel's Spider-Man is the god-awful Mary Jane and Miles sections. I can see the appeal of having these characters playable, but not like this, okay? Not like this. Surely the hardworking folks at Insomniac can understand that if a Spider-Man game is going to have you play as non-superhuman characters, that those sections would need to be interesting and or fun and or quick enough as to not annoy the player for making them take a break from enjoying the game. These parts are so bad that I don't even want to imagine how they ended up in the game, because the only answer I can come up with is so soul-crushingly cynical. These sections weigh the game down so much that I honestly can't earnestly call this game great. You might find that hyperbolic, but they actively stop you from doing the thing you came into the game for, to play as Spider-Man. And for what reason? To play some of the worst stealth sections in any game ever? I genuinely find it offensive that actual game designers thought subjecting the player to something like this was a good idea. Aside from the technological stuff, the story is probably the most praised part of the game. The relationship Peter has with Otto Octavius and his arc to becoming Doc Ock is the most narratively competent part of the plot. Aunt May's death is also a very emotionally resonant scene. But there's more to this story than those two things, and the rest ain't great. The idea of Peter and MJ having broken up is interesting, and there's of course a lot of narrative potential with that. The awkwardness of them meeting up again, the gradual reveal and realization of the relationship issues that led to the breakup, all in this superhero context, like, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with that, from the perspective of both characters. But for some reason, this game's plot elects to make MJ upset at Peter because he doesn't like it when she sneaks into the bases of criminal gangs and paramilitary groups unarmed. And then that whole thing gets solved by a near-death experience. They both understand each other's perspectives better and they get back together at the end. It would have been really cool if a Spider-Man game, of all things, gave us a portrayal of interesting relationship drama, but instead we get that potential squandered. There's also this corporate quality to the dialogue in a way that really rubs me the wrong way. It's kind of tied to the overall vibe of the game in all aspects, but it feels like the dialogue was written by people who've only done commercials before, if that makes sense. Because they really want to hammer home what the deal is with every character. There can't be anything left up for the player to interpret. Make Aunt May call Peter just to tell him she loves and cares about him. We know this. 90% of conversations have to be these super heartfelt talks where it needs to be crystal clear how everyone involved feels about any given subject. This kind of corporate vibe also extends to the voice acting. It's gotta be the direction, because most of these actors have done great work before, but like, there's no standout performances here. I don't get the sense that anyone in the cast here had a ton of fun portraying their characters. I'm sure they did, but I just don't feel it, and I think that's an important quality. Like, William Salyers as Octavius comes across like the best of the bunch, and that's because I feel like he's the only one who doesn't sound like he could turn around at any moment and advertise a Subway sandwich at me or something. I can't get over Yuri Lowenthal trying his best with these god-awful jokes they wrote for Peter. Out of the like dozens of Spider-Man quip lines, only 2 are okay. Only 2 didn't make me groan and roll my eyes. Speaking of quote-unquote comedic writing, J. Jonah Jameson just being an Alex Jones reference fucking sucks. I love Jameson as a loudmouth asshole who cares about people deep down when it really matters, and I'm pretty sure most fans would agree with that. So to have an interpretation of this character just be a reference to a real-life conspiracy theorist bigot is really weird. Like, the thought behind it was just, wouldn't it be mildly amusing if Triple J was Alex Jones? And that's it. No further thought required for this character. I don't really know how to bring this next bit up in a smart way, but after a million playthroughs of skipping cutscenes and mostly just dicking around web-slinging and fighting, it's super odd to actually engage with the entire game and see how pro-cop this title is. Like, this is straight up propaganda. Now, I'm not expecting a AAA first-party Sony game about a Disney-owned property for babies to be exactly critical of the police, but it's pretty ridiculous how the cops and criminals are portrayed here, along with the evolving relationship that Peter has with the NYPD, especially extending all the way to the DLC. Also, is it really that hard to write a Spider-Man script where you don't forget that he has superpowers? Like, are you fucking kidding me with this shit? Spider sense? Super strength? No? Okay. Now, Obviously, Spider-Man PS4 isn't bad. I might find certain crucial aspects of the game bad, but those don't ruin the whole game. I do, however, find the overwhelming praise this game has gotten to be a bit blown out of proportion, and the overall reception of it too uncritical. Though I kinda understand why. Technically, it's an immaculate super game, and I imagine most people played through it once, were impressed by the graphics, animations, and size of the open world, had fun with the intuitive combat and swinging, and were engaged with the story. You know, kinda like any of the other big party single-player Sony games, like Uncharted, for example. Just like those games, Spider-Man is a super enjoyable, one-and-done kind of experience. But similarly, when you go in for subsequent playthroughs and peel back that pretty exterior, you expose a shallow interior pool of mid-game design and writing. It's frustrating that AAA games are so uninterested in pushing the envelope for more interesting and complex mechanics and systems. Obviously, it's ultimately the fault of our short-term profit-obsessed economic system, but it would be really nice if it wasn't almost solely on the shoulders of projects with infinitely less resources to move the industry forward in the design of the thing that makes this medium what it is. And it's doubly frustrating when it's a game like Spider-Man. There's not going to be some crazy indie game of the wall crawler that does everything Insomniac Spidey is doing, plus all the fresh, new, revolutionary ideas that apparently only indies are bold enough to do. Like, that's just not gonna happen. And I get that I sound like a huge man baby crying about my Spider-Man toy not being artistically interesting enough, but when you look at what is possible, what a huge Sony first-party AAA game can do in terms of graphics, performance, scope, animation, am I really supposed to just accept that the design just has to be bland and lackluster? AAA development is hard. It's really hard, and making a game like this is next to impossible. But this isn't about Insomniac not succeeding at something, it's about a lack of trying. Maybe the swinging was supposed to be more interesting at some point in development, but in the finished product, it really feels like the design philosophy behind it was make it simple so everyone can do it effortlessly, then make it look good with animations. The tricks are a step in the right direction, but are in practice barely even a distraction from the simplicity. Holding square in a direction in between jumps isn't exactly engaging enough to spice up the swinging to save it from the boredom of holding down R2. Even something that you think would surely be good in a game like this, the music, it's bland as hell. It's not a failure, but a result of truly uninspired design. Why would they go with a super generic orchestrated score? Because of the Danny Elfman soundtrack for the Sam Raimi movies? Well, it certainly isn't anywhere near as good, and I feel anyone could have told you that you weren't gonna pull that off, so why not do something else? Something different? Is it because it wouldn't have been as safe? Yeah. But the point is, surely it isn't too much to ask for more creativity. I find it a bit frustrating that people so uncritically look at most AAA games. As long as they got the good graphics and aren't offensive to play, then they're good. Even though mechanically and system-wise, even artistically, they keep it as safe as possible. Ultimately, Marvel's Spider-Man only provides a surface-level Spider-Man experience. At first glance, it's quality, but after playing through this game countless times, skipping cutscenes and ending a sitting on the parts that I disliked, to fully taking in the experience again, engaging with the story, playing through the parts that I always skipped, and keeping at it to gather footage as quickly as possible, I gotta say the structure of this game kinda sucks. Beelining the story missions really revealed to me how much I dislike this game, because through most of it, starting a main mission, I groaned each time I remembered what I was in for. Several missions in a row, my immediate thought when starting a mission was, not this, I hate this part. Gameplay-wise, you're kinda getting the bare minimum of what you'd expect. Sure, at a AAA level and quality, but I never got the sense that all that much thought was put into, and I'm sorry to say this, making you feel like Spider-Man. Because what does that mean when we say that? It's a reference to the Batman Arkham games and how people said that those games make you feel like Batman. But the thing is, they're right, at least I think so. The Arkham games did make me feel like Batman. I'm not super into those games, but they succeeded at providing a proper Batman experience. Detective work, exploration, sneaking around, using the gadgets, the list goes on. Even narratively, I was more immersed in its respective superhero experience there than I was with Spider-Man PS4. The swinging animations might look amazing, but that doesn't make me feel like Spider-Man. I didn't feel like Spider-Man when I pressed the triggers together over and over to go as fast as I could. I didn't feel like Spider-Man when I used all the gadgets the game thought was a good idea to spruce up the gameplay with. I didn't feel like Spider-Man when I crawled in vents for the millionth time. I didn't feel like Spider-Man when I did stealth just cause the Arkham games had that. I didn't feel like Spider-Man when the story forgot about Peter's superpowers on several occasions. Many people have said this and made the same suggestions already, but I really feel like a Spider-Man game would lend itself very well to, at the very least, side quests that are time sensitive. Like maybe you'd need to finish a side quest as Spider-Man in a certain amount of time to make it to another side quest as Peter. Or you'd have to choose between two side quests that would have different outcomes depending on which you chose. And yes, obviously that would take up development resources and you'd risk alienating a part of your audience. But I don't know, maybe put less resources into making sure the clothes look super realistic and make these into normal side quests on an easier difficulty mode, or have it be a toggle in the settings? Like, are we ever gonna have a genuine think about how maybe photorealistic graphics shouldn't be the most important thing in a game? Like maybe these multi-million-dollar games should play expensive instead of just look expensive, especially now that they're charging $70 for them. My biggest problem here is the lack of artistic vision and style. Everything here is safe, designed by committee, corporate. Obviously, Disney's Marvel Spider-Man is gonna be that to a certain extent, but we've seen the same property be portrayed with infinitely more artistic integrity in something like Spider-Verse. 10 years from now, when the next big expensive AAA Spider-Man game with photorealistic graphics comes along, what's gonna bring people to revisit this one? Even Spider-Man 2, this game's own sequel, just looks like it's gonna replace it in the collective consciousness. Unless they overemphasize the gliding and I have to keep coming back here for a pure swinging experience. I'll never be rid of this game, will I? Miles getting his own little in-between game makes sense in a lot of ways. A launch game for PS5, giving Miles the spotlight so Spider-Man 2 can be about both Peter and Miles, and getting a taste of what kind of a direction Insomniac's going with these Spider-Man games without needing to wait 5 years. But because the title is a sort of liminal thing, ooh, look at me be a video essayist over here, the liminal experience of Spider-Man Miles Morales. But yeah, because the title is this sort of liminal thing, I wasn't expecting it to be all that more enjoyable than the first one. But it kinda turned out to be better. The parts I care about the most were moderately improved, which left me quite interested in how Insomniac are gonna make the landing with the next game in the series. The open world stuff is around the same level as the previous title. There's some improvements, like the whole whatever the app thing is called that simply just makes engaging with these activities a lot more enjoyable. The crimes feel more exciting and varied. Seeing a helicopter in the distance that leads to needing to deal with a bunch of enemies and stuff is definitely a step in the right direction. I really wish we could get one of these open world games that isn't Elden Ring, where you can discover things in the distance and not immediately know what they are and how to deal with it. There's a lot you can do with a superhero game. Just let things happen. We've done this obnoxious screen full of waypoints thing for over a decade. Can we come up with some new ideas on how to handle open worlds? Side quests are more involved and I like how they tie into the main story, so there's good stuff here, but then there's stuff like the sample collectibles with Uncle Aaron that suck to do and end in just the cringiest way. Web slinging has evolved in a really positive way here. All the added animations with the tricks are incredible. They flow in and out of each other in such an impressive manner, I have to assume it must have been a headache and a half to get this stuff to work just right. I mean, sure, sometimes the animations break a little bit and jerk from one to the other without any transition, kinda like my writing, hey. But not to the extent that it's an actual problem. Doing the tricks is so much fun, and that makes the swinging feel like it's going in the direction I want it to go. Even the little XP meter for them is kinda like a style meter. Not really, but close enough to make me want to get as many points with the tricks as possible. I remember my issue with the swinging on my first playthrough was that it felt slower than in the previous game, and I'm pretty sure Miles is intentionally slower than Peter to show that he's not as experienced, but on this playthrough, I really did not find this to be an issue. I had a lot more fun just purely swinging with Miles, like I found myself swinging more just for the sake of swinging, though I do still think it's not where I want it to be. I really missed the ground stomp, which I found to be useful even outside combat. More importantly, the tricks are great and fun, but whenever I want to get somewhere fast, I have to stop doing tricks and go back to the old and tired L2 plus R2 and press X. Makes sense diegetically, like within universe, might be a bit weird to do tricks when you have to hurry to save someone, but I really wish there was a balance between efficiency and fun. That's why I think doing the stylish stuff should make you go faster. Also, it would be a lot more compelling if you needed to switch up what you're doing on the fly. What if you got speed boosts by alternating between different actions? A speed boost from a web zip, a speed boost from a wall run, a speed boost from a specific trick. Now imagine if there were more actions like climbing the web, running on the ground while still holding onto a web. I don't know, some sort of corkscrew move. The sky's the limit. That's what I want. I don't want to just do the same action over and over again. That's not compelling even if it is fun. And I honestly find it ridiculous that games like Devil May Cry and Pro Skater had these ideas, but they didn't seem to stick to the collective consciousness of game design. I just think these ideas would be right at home in these games, which is why I find Spider-Man 2's gliding mechanic to be very, very concerning. I actually have quite a bit of praise for the combat as well. It's still not at a level where I'd return to this game to specifically experience the combat system, but it's an absolute improvement on the previous game. Miles' Venom thing is a really great addition. I love that there's special moves, I love how they have meter as a resource. I sure hope that doesn't change in any subsequent installments. And I love how it makes sharing meter with heals actually relevant, because there's more of a need for both healing and the Venom attacks because the enemies are more dangerous. The decision between the two is something I felt I actually needed to think about a little bit, as opposed to the previous game, where I felt like the healing was relevant, whereas the takedowns didn't really matter because all the other ways to just delete enemies. Speaking of that, gadgets are very much improved here. I still refuse to use them for the most part, but changing them from almost each one being an enemy deleter to them fulfilling specific purposes like gathering up enemies is infinitely more interesting. Though there are some weird issues with the combat in Miles' game. Something I did a lot in the first title was webbing guys up in the air and kicking them to a wall, which for some reason is a little bit inconsistent in Miles Morales. Sometimes the kick just goes to the wrong direction, sometimes there's no kick at all. And there are more of these odd inconsistencies which were not present in Peter's game. I've heard that a lot of people have had very buggy experiences with Miles Morales. Thankfully I've dodged most of that, but it seems like this title is a lot more unstable. Something else I'm quite glad about is the bosses. Not all of them, but two. I mean, I'd say all of them are better than what the first game had on offer, though I struggle to praise the Rhino fights. But the Prowler fight was actually pretty fun. I wouldn't call it good exactly, but getting to wail on Miles' uncle while he Naruto poofs away and tries to catch you off guard it's such an upgrade from the drivel we had in Peter's game. I really want to praise the final boss because it's the closest thing to an actual action game boss. There's some really good stuff here mechanically and the spectacle is neat. However, unfortunately, the camera is super wonky here. It tries to go for these cool angles, but most of the time that just results in not being able to see the boss or Miles. There's also an issue that's prevalent with regular enemies as well, where sometimes you just take damage from attacks out of nowhere because some attacks aren't given the spider sense indicator. Some regular enemies will just shoot you without warning. Otherwise, the enemies have also seen a slight upgrade. Not in any super interesting way, but they are more fun to fight than the ones in the first game. They got more moves and they're more aggressive. The most noteworthy thing to me is how the stealth has been improved by having the underground enemies be able to jump around the arenas, keeping you on your toes a lot more. I also enjoy how stealth encounters have been made a bit trickier by grouping enemies together, something to challenge you with Miles's invisibility. Then there's the story. Do I have to talk about it? I really don't want to talk about it, but I know, I gotta. It's bad, it's really bad. I try real hard to be as charitable as possible with my criticisms here, and even if I'm being super mean, I usually don't simply just poo-poo something, but the story here is just so bafflingly bad. Most likely it's not the fault of incompetent writing even, and it's not like I want that to be the case. There's so many reasons that result in bad art, especially in more corporate fields like AAA games. Time constraints, unreasonable deadlines, management issues, publisher meddling, bad communication, the list's endless. But at the end of the day, the art gets put out there to be experienced, and it doesn't really matter what the conditions were that made it the way it is. And I really can't excuse writing like this. Wow, the childhood friend turned bad guy is mad at the superhero protagonist for lying, so then she endangers a whole bunch of people because she won't listen to what the protagonist is saying? Cool. It's so contrived. And there are ideas here that are good, but it comes across like someone came up with those ideas, the big cool things that happen in the story, and then they got someone else to write it, someone who was maybe there just to do a job, or were not given much time to write the script, or some worthless money man kept interfering with their process. Whatever the case is, none of the things that could be good here feel earned. The story doesn't do the work to make me feel what I need to feel to make Finn exploding in the sky an effective moment. Other than that, the dialogue still feels overly mushy, and every conversation is super heartfelt and earnest and just ends up coming across like the story is patronizing me by hammering every character's feelings towards each other in my head. Also, every attempt at humor is cringe at best and extremely embarrassing at worst. Miles Morales, the game, not the guy, is overall an improvement on Insomniac's last outing with Spider-Man in pretty much all aspects except the story. Oh, and the suits are way worse, duh. The combat is a whole lot more engaging, and the swinging just feels way better to mess around with, thanks to the trick system. I also definitely appreciate switching from the awful puzzle minigames to actual puzzles, and despite there still being annoying walk and talk kinda sections, I'll take those any day over the stealth sequences with MJ and Miles from the last game. Though the improvements don't push this game over to being anything beyond okay. It still feels like there's not enough artistic vision behind it. It feels too safe still. The music is essentially the same except they added a beat to it. The designs of the characters and pretty much everything else except the Spidey suits are bland, overly detailed, high-tech gruel. Insomniac might improve mechanics, systems to feel their own technological feats, but I'm not convinced that I'll be anywhere near satisfied with the aesthetics, design, narrative, or really anything that pertains to the artistic side of things in this series. When it comes to Spider-Man 2, as much as a lot of the improvements here made me hopeful for the swinging and combat at least, I know they're walking those back. Cooldowns and gliding don't exactly fill me with excitement, but I guess we have to see. I don't think I've ever been as excited for a game I knew I was gonna have a bunch of issues with as Spider-Man 2. AAA games tend to have the same problems that always irk me, but I love me some Spider-Man, so I have to play the big new expensive Spidey game. But I obviously enjoy these games. As many qualms as I have with them, they're still fun and worth playing. Also, it's not like I can get a better Spider-Man experience in game form from anywhere else. What, am I gonna play Web of Shadows? As cool as that game can be, it's not the kind of experience I'm looking for. Spider-Man 2 though, as an experience, it's gotta be the best of the bunch here, right? Not just in its own series, but out of all games about the web slinger. The money shows. As much as I harp on about AAA games and their issues, some of them are constantly improving in a way even I can't dismiss. I'd be lying if I said the technical feats here don't impress. And there is a certain kind of comfort and intuitiveness only these unfathomably expensive games can provide. Now obviously that's not gonna stop me from criticizing this game here, but I'll try my best to give it the flowers it deserves along the way. The first time Spider-Man 2 let me swing, I was kinda blown away by how good this game looks. Like, the detail practically assaulted my senses, and I had to get used to just looking at the game, because there's just so much to look at. But yeah, the game looks gorgeous. I was not expecting them to upgrade the open world to this extent. So much more expansive, so much more detail, looks spectacular, filled with NPCs and still running at 60 FPS on performance mode, mostly that is. Insomniac's technical expertise will never cease to amaze me. The open world activities are decently improved here. There's your basic collectibles in the form of tech crates, you got combat challenges with Mysterio, robo-bird chases, Sandman fights, enemy bases, etc. Unfortunately, there's nothing that fleshes out the open world experience. Sure, you're taking pictures of New York life instead of just buildings in this one, but there's nothing surprising to stumble upon while swinging from one thing to the next. And it's not even an accurate representation of New York life. The weirdest thing you find is a couple of shirtless guys in Spider-Man masks being filmed while dancing. Side quests, I don't really have much to say about. I wish there were one more story-focused quest for each Spidey, or at least Miles should have had something more serious for his side content. He mostly just helps out these STEM major corporate caricatures who sound like the whitest writer ever just googled, how to appeal to the progressive youth. Anyway, I get that he has Mysterio's whole thing too, but when Peter gets side content that's pretty heavy on the story and even teases future plot stuff, I'd like to see Miles get something similar too. Unfortunately, web swinging around the Big Apple here leaves a lot to be desired. Spider-Man 2 implements a swinging assist setting that's cranked up by default. This essentially makes the swinging work like it has in previous games, and lowering it makes the swinging more challenging by being more physics dependent and stops correcting your position mid-swing. I appreciate the sentiment and the idea behind this, but the execution doesn't bring the swinging experience anywhere closer to where I'd personally like it to be. You see, turning this setting all the way down to 0 feels more challenging, yes, but not in a fun way. It's just more cumbersome. It's not interesting to me for the game to stop me from swinging because I'm too low to the ground or because Spidey grazed his toe on the roof of a car. And yeah, I dislike the game making you float above the ground if you get too low with the assist on, just like in the previous games, and it's good that the devs recognize this to be an irk a lot of players had, but I don't think simply stopping the swing was the correct solution here. Remember in some of the movies like Spider-Verse for example, when Miles runs on the road while holding onto a web? Why not something like that? That would be a cool way to solve the floating problem, then would add one more cool thing to do while swinging. I would really enjoy having a reason to want to swing both really high up as well as going all the way to ground level. So because I prefer the game not stopping me from swinging, I set the assist to halfway, which feels like a good balance between having your swinging not defy physics while still keeping the experience comfortable and fun. But that's not the big thing added to the swinging for this game. No, the new hotness for traversal are the web wings. I've been kind of foreshadowing it, and I was really worried about these when I first saw them in the gameplay showcase. I go to Spider-Man games to swing, not fly, and it really looked like the game wanted you to use them constantly, if not even most of the time. To a certain extent that's true. The map is kinda designed now around having the web wings. It's more expansive and there are a lot more areas with low buildings or other places where it makes sense to glide over than swing. Gliding also makes you go a lot faster sometimes and lets you be more precise than the swing. I think I've made it clear that I don't really like this, and even though I kinda hate the wings conceptually, trying to use them as little as possible, they're just too damn useful to ignore completely, which is annoying. Personally, I'd rather have the wings be a little bit tough to use, have them be cumbersome and maybe carry you for only a little while before dropping you. Have the gliding be more realistic, or at least not as overly useful and competent way to move by itself, and have it be more of a complementary thing to the swinging. This also makes me concerned for the next game, because who's to say Insomniac isn't just gonna put more focus and attention on the gliding rather than swinging. The swinging is still nowhere near where I want it to be, and I'd rather not have the web wings distract its potential development into something better any further than they already have. Because other than the web wings and the assist setting, the only noteworthy additions here is the ability to turn a corner in a cooler, more efficient way by holding circle. Otherwise, it's pretty much what it was in Miles's game, except here I'm doing less tricks because of the gliding, and even less when I have the assist turned completely off. I'm still saying there should be a style meter-esque thing in these games that encourages the player to do different moves to gain speed. Just give me that, plus a handful of cool maneuvers to flesh out that system, and I'll be a happy camper. This game really solidified it for me that I don't think I'll ever get tired of webbing up enemies and sticking them to walls and on the ground. Like, that really is the most enjoyable part of the combat for me in these games. It's the closest thing to making me feel like Spider-Man, though I'm not sure if I like or dislike 2 making this easier and faster by letting you kick enemies straight down from the air. I'd like to have a reason to kick them towards the wall beyond just me wanting to do that, which again would be fixed by a style meter type system. But at the same time, the air kick bouncing the enemies back up to you if they're not webbed up is super fun, so I definitely wouldn't want it to not be here. Therefore, Insomniac, style meter, get on it. But as much as I'd love the combat of these games to almost solely focus on webbing up enemies and doing that in different stylish and fun ways, that's not the case, and there's a lot to be talked about with the combat. Miles Morales left me quite hopeful, actually, about the direction they were gonna go with in terms of combat. That game had a nice and simple special move mechanic that took meter as resource. Tried and true. 2 for some reason decided to throw that away for cooldowns. I'm a cooldown hater. I don't think waiting to have access to special moves is good game design. It makes much more sense to build up resource with your regular moveset than use those moves to your heart's content as long as you have the resource. It was so much more fun to build up to a full meter of venom attacks in Miles' game than unload it all however you please. If I just wanted to use the same attack 3 times in a row, the game let me. Also, it feels a lot better to get a feel of how much you need to use your regular moveset to fill the bar for one special move than wait however many seconds a particular move needs to come back online. It just feels to me that cooldowns get used because designers don't want to deal with balancing special moves. Lazy, to me, is a no-no word in game development criticism. Games are so hard to make, you really can't be lazy for working on one. But when it comes to restricting special moves with cooldowns instead of a resource, I struggle to think of another word for it. If it's too much work to figure out and assign different values of meter gain for different stuff, then hire me, Insomniac. I'll do it. No, but seriously, I hate my jobs. Just let me do some game design remotely, please, I'm begging you. The enemy variety is finally where I wanted it to be in the first game. We got robots, we got monsters, and variety within all types of enemies. There's the normal guys, obviously, but now there's robo-dogs, robo-birds, sand guys, big armored guys with powerful attacks, different kinds of symbiote monsters that dodge, shoot, rush, grab. The enemies are pretty great, though of course I have my issues. I played 2 on Spectacular difficulty, the highest one you can set for the first playthrough. The difficulty is fine up until the symbiotes show up, and then it gets kinda fucky. The game breaks in on itself a little bit when you're getting assaulted by the symbiotes from every angle, including outside the camera. I got killed a few times, too many, because some big attack came out of nowhere. You see, regular enemy attacks have a spider sense indicator on Spidey, but this game introduces a parry and attacks that have have to be parried or jumped to avoid have an indicator on the enemy. And much to my chagrin, the big symbiote boys like to jump in from outside the camera to perform one of these moves that easily take away most of your health. This, coupled with the lack of lock-on, which feels like it becomes more and more of a problem with each entry in this series, make combat in the late game quite frustrating. This forced me to use all of the gadgets, which design-wise is a good thing, but despite Insomniac almost fully improving them to be unique functional parts of combat, I still dislike them for not fitting Spider-Man in my opinion. And though sure you could try to do some slightly bigger brain combos by launching enemies to the air, gathering them up and maybe using a cooldown move, I only ever used all of them to get rid of any remaining enemies if I was overwhelmed or running out of time in the trial things. But yeah, I mentioned the parry. I got some stuff to say about that too. Why does it take a million years for the parry attacks to land? The timing is super weird because it takes so long for the enemy to actually attack. Like, I get bored of waiting for the indicator to turn red, so I'd like to keep fighting other enemies while this one guy winds up for the parry attack for 5 years, but I can't because the parry doesn't cancel all animations. If you're doing certain animations, you're stuck, so if you want to parry, you need to stand there and wait for the several weeks it takes for some of these dudes to turn red. Remember in the previous game when you do a launcher and it would push back enemies close to you? Kinda miss that, though it's not needed and it is fun to launch an enemy and needing to dodge another who's attacking you at the same time. But something I really miss is enemies being able to jump around the arenas like the underground guys could in Miles Morales. Such a simple thing that made stealth so much more interesting. I'm honestly kind of baffled that they didn't bring that back for 2. Enemies kinda move around in some of the base things, but not the same way. I'm glad to say they've actually improved the writing. I wouldn't say it's good, but it is better. Dialogue in the main story is a lot less cringy, and all of the overly mushy stuff is toned down and utilized a bit more appropriately. I really like Harry in this, though I'd say it's mostly because of the performance. But I enjoyed how they were portraying his friendship with Peter. I still have issues and nitpicks with a lot of the plot and characters, but most of them aren't really worth mentioning. What is worth mentioning when it comes to criticisms is that the writing is still conveniently forgetting about Peter's superpowers to get the plot where they want it to go. So MJ quote-unquote accidentally hops into a hunter van that takes her to their base. At this point, I have to assume she's addicted to getting herself in danger. I wish they'd have the balls to actually put that in the text, because then her character would have something going on. Anyway, you do a shitty stealth sequence. Peter and Harry in his Agent Venom getup arrive at the base. You fight a bunch of hunters. Kraven shows up, blocks a punch from Peter, and then stabs him without his spider sense going off. It really cannot be that difficult to write a superhero story and remember that the superhero has superpowers. And I'm not saying that Peter should never get hurt ever because he has spider sense, though it does feel like that's what the writers think. This is also when Peter first dons the symbiote, so this moment that should be cool and important was completely deflated, because all I could think was, couldn't the writers have figured out anything else that'd make more sense? Like, what if instead there was a boss fight with Kraven, something that would tease the actual fight later on? Have Harry try and deal with most of the other hunters while Peter tries to defend MJ and Connors from Kraven. This could be a great way of showing how threatening Kraven actually is through gameplay, while having Peter get stabbed make more sense because he could get exhausted and overwhelmed from the fight and Kraven's wily tactics. Him just not having his spider sense go off for no reason is just cheap and frankly bad writing. I'd also say Peter's arc with the symbiote doesn't hit as hard as it could. I feel like it really lacks the kind of big "what am I doing" moment. Him getting beat up by Miles and then reflecting on his actions just feels a bit limp and weak. You could have done everything pretty much the same way if there'd just be a bigger emotional moment at the end. It would have also been a whole lot bolder if you played as Peter instead of MJ when he gets taken over by the symbiote. Making the player do the bad thing the symbiote is forcing Peter to do would be some Kino stuff. But no, we're forced to suffer through bad MJ sections. Seriously, Insomniac, what's the deal with these? Why are you obsessed with awful stealth sections sections. And as funny as giving MJ a gun and letting her murk a bunch of monsters is, I don't want to play this. I spent 70 bones on Spider-Man 2 so I could play Spider-Man. If I wanted to play a bad cover shooter, I'd play Uncharted, and I don't want to play Uncharted. I really don't know what they're trying to go for with MJ in these games overall even. They're trying way too hard to make her likable, but not in any kind of way that works. Like, if this is your attempt at a strong female character, then sorry, but you're not doing feminism by giving the most two-dimensional character in your cast a gun. And if you're gonna force me to play a third-person shooter section, then make it good. You could've just slapped a Ratchet and Clank style control scheme and actually attempted to make this fun. Now you might think that's too hacky, that wouldn't make any sense. Just make it make sense. Give her a robot suit or let her control the Scream symbiote. That wouldn't even be out of place with how hacky the rest of the story gets. And I enjoy and respect how hacky the story gets with the symbiotes here. I don't know if I like it a whole bunch, but there was definitely a cook in the kitchen. Whether they cooked or not is up to interpretation. They take a lot of influence from Donny Cates' run on Venom, which is really fun. I just wish the symbiote itself got a bit more focus. Enough to at least imply that it is a character in and of itself. My favorite symbiote stuff are usually the ones that portray them as just alien creatures with their own motivations. It's a lot more interesting to me that they're sympathetic characters instead of just evil villains. More scenes that would have established the connection with the symbiote and Harry beyond like the one we got would have gone a long way. Then there's the hackiest part of them all, Peter becoming anti-Venom, kinda. So they do the absolute carnage thing that the symbiote leaves a bit of itself in its host after being separated from them. So Miles, along with the help of Martin Lee, go inside Peter's psyche to unlock the little symbiote leftovers, which results in a plot justification for Peter to retain his goo powers, but white. This would have been a lot cooler and effective if it was something Peter needed to do. Like, I can picture this kind of shonen anime moment where Peter needs to accept and overcome his guilt for what he did when he had the symbiote. Miles and Lee could still help him get there, but it's a bit weird to have Miles go inside Peter's head and unlock the symbiote powers for him without the downside. I know it would be a whole lot of unnecessary work, but if the anti-venom powers looked more like webs instead of just white tendrils, like in Shattered Dimensions or something, I would have pogged out of my mind. I just really like Spider-Man having crazy web powers like in some games, and I'm not a big fan of the way Insomniac is evolving Peter's moveset. Him throwing around a big-ass web ball is infinitely cooler to me than some high-tech gadgets and Doc Ock spider legs. Another thing that irks me with the writing here is that you need to ignore stuff to make some plot points work. There's this bit where MJ gets taken over by the Scream symbiote. I thought this was pretty unexpected, so it was a nice surprise that they do something like this, and it's one of the respectfully hacky things I think is pretty fun. They take this moment, this boss fight, and decide to open up about Peter and MJ's relationship issues. Cool idea, but when the big issue here is Peter being broke and not helping out financially, despite him having a high-tech 3D printer up his ass that makes robots in seconds, it doesn't make much sense and it's hard to connect with. Could've just made this about Peter not being around much and not helping out in general, leaving MJ not only to deal with her stuff but Peter's stuff too. But I guess the writers were too into speaking through the game about their own relationship issues. The post-credits scene teases Silk for the next game, I guess. If they're gonna add more playable spider people into these games, they really need to start differentiating them a bit better. Because if Silk just plays the same as our two Spider-Men, but with just different cooldown attacks, and she has the same personality, that's just gonna be insufferable. If she's also busting out awful quips, if she's giving out overly heartfelt speeches just like Peter and Miles, then what are we even doing? But Insomniac, you will have all of my respect if you put Silk in the next game and she's like an edgy, more brutal, no-nonsense kind of spider person. Maybe channel some 90s flavor through her, which I know the character doesn't have any connection to, but she's gotta have something interesting to differentiate her from the rest of the cast. I really don't have any confidence for Insomniac to make the writing of having 3 spider people work. Overall, Spider-Man 2 improves on most things, but still stubbornly sticks to odd design decisions, some of which to me don't fit the wall crawler. The game also drops the ball in terms of execution with stuff like difficulty, and discards good ideas from the previous game while adding weaker replacements such as the cooldowns. While Miles Morales left me hopeful for the sequel, this title has me worried for Spider-Man 3. Instead of adding to and improving the swinging, the number one thing in a Spidey game, Insomniac adds a mechanic that in a way cuts down on that experience. The gliding itself is fine and can be quite fun, but it does make the player swing less, which is the opposite of what I personally want. So what is the next step? More mechanics, more moves, more tricks for swinging or for gliding? Something tells me I'm not gonna like the answer. What about combat? It's still fun. I might dislike some aspects of it, but some tweaks, animation canceling, maybe a lock-on, and I'd be pretty happy. Is that gonna happen though? Probably not. Peter's got the anti-venom powers and a devil trigger. Does he need gadgets and the robot spider legs still? Who knows what'll be different next time, though probably not much. Will the writers learn not to forget about Spider-Man's superpowers, or is Peter gonna get killed by some normal guy next time? Will there still be awful MJ stealth sections? You could at least let me skip them on subsequent playthroughs, you know? But the one thing that worries me that I thought I definitely would not need to worry about at all is the suit selection. It's awful here. How are Peter's suits so bad in this? I didn't even think it was possible for the suit selection to be so mid, but somehow they pulled it off. But Insomniac, I could forgive everything I criticized here. All of it. If you just gave me the sensational suit. Just give me the sensational suit, Insomniac. It's the best damn Spidey suit. Just let me have it. Just make the blue parts dark. Maybe put like a shell shading effect on it so it looks nice. So it's like really dark and almost black, or maybe completely black with just blue highlights, and then make the web shooters look really cool, but don't make them look overly detailed. In fact, do not add too much detail to the suit. Don't fuck with the lenses. Don't make the lenses weird. I want the emotive lenses. Just the regular lenses, the suits that you made, those are good. Just have those. Maybe make them a little bit bigger. You don't have to, but maybe. Just, I don't know, just please, I want the sensational suit. Just give it to me. Wait, I'm not done yet. There's still stuff I forgot to talk about. A couple of final complaints, and then I promise I'll end this on a positive note. So not only did they double down on bad MJ sections, but Insomniac made Peter's walkie-talkie bits even worse. I genuinely cannot wrap my head around wanting to include these types of things in games, and the fact that they're not skippable even after beating the game should honestly be a point of more contention. Is it an issue that I'm having too much fun and I need to be punished? With this? Something I noticed only in the editing phase here is that Spider-Man 2 has nowhere near as many cutscenes that show off Spider-Man doing cool Spider-Man things. The first game was chock full of neat as hell scenes, showcasing some exquisite animation, but Spider-Man 2 barely has any. Maybe they put all that animation prowess into the Venom set piece, which is so cool, by the way. They really put their whole pussies into animating Venom. He looks incredible. I hope we get another chance to play as him, maybe in whatever DLC they're putting out for this game. In conclusion, I learned a lot while making this video, both about Insomniac's Spider-Man series, but also about this whole video making thing. In terms of the games, I think my favorite out of them is Miles Morales. Despite its not so great writing, it does have a clear reverence for a more gameplay focused design. The game feels concerned with providing the player a more quality experience in terms of combat and stealth encounters, putting out a decent challenge on those fronts as well as with the swinging challenges, which are strangely absent from Spider-Man 2. And that kind of gameplay focused design is something I respect a whole lot, especially when it's coming from a AAA game, even if it isn't present throughout the entire game. But yeah, it turns out making one of these hour-long videos is kinda hard when you have a full-time job with an irregular schedule. So if you'd at all care to see more videos from me, though maybe not ones as long as this for a while, then do the YouTube things. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, why don't you? And maybe we'll see you again next time.